All right, welcome to Asynchronous Structures for Learning. Oh, I need to start the recording. See, I gave myself that reminder and then I forgot. Okay.
Marissa, I'm recording it for you because I'm your tech.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I appreciate you, Liz. All right. Get back in the right presenter mode. Okay. So I am your friendly neighborhood support specialist, Marissa Bannerman, and I am excited to share with you what I have called structures for asynchronous learning. And I'm not sure that's quite the right word, but we're going to talk some theory and some reality and some tools, and we're going to delve into some rich tasks. And I hope by the end of this, you will have a renewed vision of and sense of what we're all trying to do. So here is... Let's see. Here is our little hybrid check-in. So we're going to check in and practice using the word hybrid without hyperventilating. Here are 15 cat-animal hybrids that came up on my Facebook yesterday. And what I'm wondering, and this is important, is which one of these animals most accurately represents your teacher persona and why? So go ahead and put it in the chat. Obviously, I am the dragon cat because he most accurately resembles my own true love, Pickle the cat, who you saw in the previous slide and heard, depending on when you got into the meeting. If this doesn't weird you out, it probably should. Dragon cat. Penguin cat. There was also a baby penguin cat. If you want me to send you that one, I will. The meowl. Yeah, me too. I find that time has no meaning in the pandemic. The king capra. The one that weirded me out most, I think, was the fish. I was like, it's wrong to put a hairy face on a fish. All right, feel free to steal this and use it with your students. That's why I put it up. So we're going to start with this quote from George Couros. And the biggest thing about asynchronous learning is that students don't just need the skills to work without us, but they need the motivation to work without us. So I'm just going to read the quote out loud so that I'm not talking and you're trying to read at the same time. Learning is creation, not consumption. Knowledge is not something a learner absorbs, but something a learner creates. Learning happens when a learner integrates new knowledge and skills into his or her existing structure of self. Learning is literally a matter of creating new meanings, new neural networks, and new patterns of electrochemical interactions within one's brain and body system. So for too long, school has been, and this is just my opinion, about compliance. If a kid isn't working on their work in class, you box them on their ears or cram their heads into their books or send them to the office or, tap them on the shoulder, whatever you do. And this is based in this erroneous belief that students are only motivated by extrinsic factors. And we were talking about this in the grading thing this morning, but now we know that this is not true. But we default to these punitive measures because it lets us all off the hook, right? We just slap a 0 in the grade book and say to ourselves, well, that'll show them, and then they will instantly become a better student. However, there are a million reasons this is problematic. And they range from the Puritans to the Industrial Revolution to white supremacy. But the one I wanted to draw our attention to today is that if we are only interested in student compliance, what we're communicating to our students is that compliance is all we believe they're capable of. As well as dignifying students with high expectations for their success. Raising this bar dignifies us as teachers as well, and it lends credence to our assignments and our pedagogy and the structures that we already have placed in our classrooms, because we're not going to bump kids up for effort or for being nice or with brownie points. Like it says, you're capable and I am credible. And so asynchronous learning is not just about remote learning. It's about student dignity through autonomy, engagement, and authenticity. So we're going to talk for a second about the benefits of asynchronous structures as they complement other instruction, not just by itself. So safety, autonomy, space, and an archive are the spaces that asynchronous structures support. First, asynchronous structures support student engagement because students can access materials when and how they need to, rather than establishing the classroom as the only place where learning occurs, right? And we've learned that this year, right? Learning can't occur at school, so it has to occur everywhere else, but we were not equipped to do that at the beginning of the year. Also, it establishes that idea that the classroom is a performance space and there's no room for mistakes or for failure. And they're on stage and on the spot all the time. And although I know a couple of us here are performers by nature, our students do not thrive in that kind of high stress spotlight constantly. Second, asynchronous structures support students developing individualized systems for learning and organization, as well as other soft skills. And if you were in the grading session this morning, you know that we are all very concerned about the soft skills. And dare I say, so much so, we tend to focus on the soft skills and not the standards. I won't make you raise your hands if you're guilty, but if you spend some time thinking about that later today, you will either arrive at a new nirvana place as a teacher, or you will want to walk into the ocean. Third, we are creating space for students to reflect on learning and practice and to refine their contributions to our classroom spaces. And this also refers to space for teachers to provide feedback and differentiation for students. I know that we all wish we had more time to plan, to develop things, to differentiate, to give meaningful feedback that will be heeded by students. And asynchronous structures create that space in some ways. And finally, asynchronous structures support the creation of an archive of information and student work, of discussion, of videos that students can return to throughout the class. And this is so important because it brings more equitable access to more students. So if a student is absent for whatever reason, many times they're just unwittingly excluded from instruction and from those interactions that the learning is based on for that whole day. And I think some of us have more things in place to support students who are absent, but that's always something I was really kind of bad at. Like I am not a binder person, so I always had to have a student maintain the absent binder in case you were gone. But like, I don't know if anyone ever witnessed a student walking over to the absent binder, but I'm not sure it ever happened in my 20 years in the classroom. So these asynchronous structures make it easier for students to interact with the instruction and with their peers. So our first takeaway is that asynchronous structures provide flexibility for students and teachers in addition to creating shared resources throughout the course. And as we learned this year, flexibility is a luxury that does not have to be optional, right? We've all had to be flexible. We have all opened up our classrooms and our minds to new ways of doing things. And I think that that's good and that we should hold on to that. The next part is to reflect on essential learning outcomes, not just essential standards, but essential outcomes, because asynchronous learning is actually about doing less, not more. And I think we get caught up in the day-to-day of, grading homework and turning it back and getting ready, but we're not really thinking about how these things affect students. All right, so I stole this from a different site, which will be on the resources and takeaways document. But basically, the three most important words for today that relate to this presentation are that we are thinking about engagement, authenticity, and autonomy. And if you're saying to yourself, wait a minute, that's what I want for my synchronous time too, you're not alone. And again, asynchronous structures support synchronous time as well. So engagement, to me, these were really interesting ways of thinking about all three of these things. That's why I pulled them from the source. But what kinds of knowledge, skills, abilities, and attitudes, knowledge, skills, abilities, and attitudes are essential for your students to learn in your discipline? For example, and I'm going to start a big fight here. I may have talked to Katrina about this at one time because that's my teaching style, is to provoke. But I'm going to reflect that students don't actually need to learn how to write a literary analysis essay, except to write one on the test. They will never, unless they pursue literature as a career, have to write a literary essay again in their entire lives. Never, ever, ever, ever. And how much time do we spend focusing on this in middle school and high school? Way too much. They do need to learn how to analyze literature, right? The essential skill is to be able to decipher messages and motifs in art and literature, not to write an essay about it. So how do we engage students with ways that will be useful to them for a long time? The second outcome is authenticity. In 3 years or 10 years or 20 years, what would you like your students to still know and be able to do? And I know for teachers at different levels, this is different, right? Andrea is a kindergarten teacher. And so when she thinks 3 years in advance, it's a lot different than when I think 3 years in advance, because my students will be in college, hopefully, or the workforce. But other people's students will be in 6th or 8th grade or primary grades or whatever. So I would encourage yourself not to limit it to 3 years, but like, what about 10 years down the line and 20? Like vocab stems are hugely important. The finer plot points of the Odyssey are not very important. And how many of us have made that 200 question final exam about the plot points of every single book we have read this semester? Oh my gosh. I feel such shame over that kind of thing. Like, that's not useful at all. They don't need to know how to do that. And the last one is autonomy. And this one hit home for me as well. Like, what do you want your students to be able to learn on their own after your class ends? I'm guilty of making students dependent on me for access to learning. It's one of my greatest teaching crimes. I'm the expert. I am the authority. No one has access to learning except through me. But thinking about how we want our students to engage and feel about our content later is a game changer, right? So we want them to think of our class as like a class that they loved and they still think about and apply those skills, or do we want them to think about it as misery for all eternity? And that Miss B, she was just she was crazy and she had high standards and she hated everyone. Or do we want them to be like, oh, I love this book? So the second takeaway is that we need to do only what's necessary for students to develop skills that will continue to support learning in our content and our classrooms and beyond. So like, have that big vision. Like, what does the forest look like? Not just the trees. And don't worry, we're going to have a little chat time in a minute. So I'm not just going to talk at you for a whole hour. No one panic. So what does this look like in and outside of a classroom? Let's look at the intersections of engagement and autonomy and authenticity. The difference between synchronous learning and asynchronous learning is that we can't control students. This is a deeply psychological dilemma And many of us have positive and negative damaging experiences rooted in these control issues. And they also have roots in the white supremacist foundations of our country and our education system. And if you're having a visceral reaction to me saying that, please refer to Chapter 3 of Coaching for Equity. Chapter 3 of Coaching for Equity. But the intersections here are created by interactions between students, student-directed inquiry, and a clear path to mastery. Because we want to clear the way to learning, not obscure it. So in the chat or out loud, you can unmute yourself. Share something you have learned this year about student engagement. Patrick. It is horrible. I start a lot of fights. Yeah, parents have no idea that whether their kids are engaged at all, right? All of that onus is put on the teacher. There we go. Student-centered learning. Yep, we have to ask them questions to get them comfortable. Little things matter. It is harder this year. I think the need of those things has come to the fore in a way that we have been able to ignore for a long time. Yeah, Francesca, sometimes students who are less likely to engage in a face-to-face setting are more comfortable in a virtual setting. That is one of the hidden gems of the lockdown, I think. Yeah, there is a connection between those behaviors and that engagement and academic performance also. Good, 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 good. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, now on to the fun stuff. All right, I have 3 little projects. One is one that I was working on, and 2 are that I took from other teachers. But these are some examples of rich tasks from teachers and from my brain. And what I want you to think about is how each of these activities was enhanced by asynchronous structures of engagement, autonomy, and authenticity. And these are not things that have to be done outside of a classroom, but they can be. And they do allow space for some of those other things. Okay, so the first thing is this is Christy Chapman's project. She is a 3rd to 5th grade gifted teacher at Adobe Acres. And she shared this project with the digital innovators at our last meeting, and it is great. So what they did was they designed dog parks, right? And then they started with a Jamboard to plan it. And then they made a 3D model of it by the end. And then they consulted with a real life architect in, I want to say Colombia. Yeah. To share their projects with a real architect. So this one is a kid who oh, I didn't put whose this was, but you can see the different perspectives here, right? Like in how they had to build the furniture and the trees and the all the different things. Like that takes a lot. Look at this shower. See the dog washer thing right here? Um, look at this. It's just ingenious. I love it. Or are they lights? Is that a light pole? It looks like a shower when you're looking at it like this. This is a kid who built a dog park dedicated to his veteran grandfather. And his grandpa passed away right before this project. So he dedicated the park to Grandpa Emilio and created a space to train service dogs for veterans. And this is his planning Jamboard and then what his final project looked like. Is that not the cutest thing you've ever seen in your entire life? A dog park with a training spot for service dogs. Just unbelievable. And then this is a project from a kid who wasn't in town for the presentations. And so he was able to meet with his class from where his family had gone. And I don't know if this has happened to any of you, but in my class, the day we're scheduled for presentations, it's like the season finale of the Vampire Diaries. Like everybody is missing, all hell is broken loose, and for some reason there's no learning taking place, and you get a million phone calls about why people can't present. You know, all the poor kids with social anxiety are like, I'm never coming back to school ever. You can't make me, whatever. But this is a really good way for the kids to present while not being there, right? Because then it takes that out of the equation totally. And I'm just going to play a couple little clips because it's too fun.
My name of this project, it's a mini house, and I'm gonna go ahead and start showing you guys outside. So first, I added this fence outside so it could look like a nice yard. And then I added some chairs so like people can eat or maybe just chat there by the pool and maybe get in. And I put the pool. That's why there's like a box.
Okay, so he's explaining like how he built his little mini house. And then here
inside, this right here is like a couch where you can watch that TV up there. And then this is like a little kitchen where you can sit down and eat. And over here is like a snack bar, some chips and chocolates. And then over here, it's like a work area. There's a chair and a computer there, a desk. And then right there, there is a bunk bed, and you can go up the little stairs.
I think it looks really cool.
Here, this is Christy.
Goes right there.
I think it looks really cool.
Thank you.
What was it that you liked about it, Leslie?
I really like the pool.
I knew people were going to say that. That's why I added it.
I love his little voice. But like, yeah, very sweet. Yeah, he gets to like explain his work. He gets feedback from the teacher and from his peers, and he's so proud. That's why I put it there, because I knew people would like it. And then at the end, he explains like why he had to put the mini house on the trampoline, and it's because the dogs were going to get it if they had it inside. Anyway, it's this whole thing, and it really gives you a window into the kids' lives and realities.
My name
Okay,
of
hold on.
this project.
Okay, let me get back to my presentation mode.
My name of this.
There we go. All right, so this is from my dear friend Emily Brandon. This is from the very beginning of the year, and these were grammar masks. And so you can see that there was a variety of products. There were a variety of ways to be successful, right? They could do it digitally. They could do it for real. They could do it on a piece of paper. There are all kinds of ways that kids could make this their own. And they were all, you can tell, really invested. And I put this picture of the apostrophes don't make nouns plural because I actually own this mask. And so I think some of these kids could make some real money doing this. But that was an engaging project. You know, it was interesting, and it incorporated those beginning grammar standards, and it was just really fun. Okay, so now we're going to pause, and in the chat or out loud, share something that you fear around giving students autonomy, because this can be terrifying. And I think that sometimes we withhold. Oh, Patrick! It's like you can see into my soul. Yes! In my early career, that was rule number 1, is that Miss Bannerman is the center of attention. And now I'm like, oh, that they won't do the assignment. Okay. That they won't challenge themselves, right? Well, that's one cool thing about these rich tasks, is that those different options for choice make it harder for them to just choose the easiest one, right? It's hard to assess a specific learning outcome, which is not, you're right, not always bad, but that does make it scary for us. Ashley, were you in my training yesterday? Okay, good. This is all great and sets us up for our next section here. Okay, so this is an example of a rich task that hopefully incorporates the engagement, authenticity, and autonomy. So let's just kind of dive in here. This was for a history thing that I was doing, but I also have an ELA version. I don't know, has anyone else seen these Washington's diaries on the web? They are hilarious. But they're all these paintings of George Washington, and then people have written these captions on them. And that alone could like fuel me for an entire semester of history teaching. But these memes are a really good way for kids to express themselves and to make connections with content, right? Because they're all doing it all the time anyway. They're just doing it in online spaces and not in our classrooms. So these are my 3 favorite ones that I found for American history. I really love Mike Wazowski freaking out that he was picked for the Constitutional Convention. So we're going to break this down into a couple different sections, but for the fine art memes, there are a minimum of 3 ways to be successful, right? You can make a meme, you can use a meme template with a historical meme, or you can make one out of fine arts pieces, or you can analyze existing memes. And the thing I like about this is that kids don't have to cheat. If they do not have it in them to make up memes, which who knows, they can complete this assignment and succeed on this assignment using memes that already exist. So there's that differentiation that takes that temptation away for kids to cheat because they don't have to. And then you don't have to spend your entire day like trying to catch them on Google. I don't know if anyone else has done that before, but I've definitely gone on that kind of little fact-finding mission. A rich task incorporates more of the higher levels of blooms and webs, right? So we have all 4 levels represented here with this assignment. So what's literally going on in the picture? What can you tell us about the people? What are the relationships and what aspects can we identify with? Those incorporate all of the different levels, and we don't just stop at 1 and 2, because as we were just talking about in the chat, sometimes we think kids are not going to be able to do those higher level things, or that they will balk at doing them. The other cool thing that I like about this is that with memes, the prior knowledge is individualized. It's not subject to experiences that each student may or may not have, right? So what's literally happening in this picture, I just did this little example. What can you tell me about the people? All right, so Frodo is trying to get information out of Gandalf about the 111st birthday party. That's my prior knowledge that I'm bringing with me to this. Frodo is amused by Gandalf's unwillingness to share the details of his plans with him. and he and Gandalf have a good relationship. So those are my inferences, my observations, my surface analysis of what's happening. What relationships are depicted and what relationships are mirrored, like with the content? So we have the playful relationship between Frodo and Gandalf. Frodo trusts Gandalf. He's not afraid of the unknown details. The relationship between the delegates and the constituents is like Frodo's and Gandalf's. All right. What aspects can we identify with? And this is where the magic happens. All right. Gandalf is wiser than Frodo and closer to Bilbo and has a crucial role to play in the party preparations. Frodo will be a participant in the party, even though he is not planning it. At the Constitutional Convention, the delegates were also planning an important thing that will involve many of the people who are not making decisions. The townspeople trusted the delegates to do the job they had been assigned, but apparently it was more important to keep the process secret than to be comfortable. This shows that from the beginning, the delegates were excluding portions of the population rather than including them in the decision making. So I just got like a huge paragraph out of this silly Lord of the Rings meme. And that's what happens when the kids see the memes. They create meaning, but they don't even know what they're doing. And so this kind of exercise makes them make their thinking visible, and then they can see the connections that they're making with the content. So for our next little piece, as a little break, in the chat or out loud, share one type of authentic text you could use in your discipline. Something that is not a textbook or a novel or a picture book. What's an authentic text? So for English, my favorite authentic text is a screenplay.
In math, I teach high school math, and that's a hard one in high school math.
It is.
But screenplays, there's certainly movies that are the topic of them is how somebody won the Fields Award or something because they were good at math and they developed this new theory. Or there's things like Flatland, which I show in geometry a lot.
And even like they could write like a screenplay for a documentary or like an instructional video about how to learn a skill. Like there are all kinds of ways that you could apply screenplay. If you want further information, I would love to work with you about that. But yeah, we have lesson planning. Oh, what an authentic text. Scientific papers, scientific articles, scientific lab reports, lyrics, right? Like there are all these things. And I think that a lot of us sometimes we get tied to these different textbooks and sources that are not authentic. And so it's no wonder that kids don't want to engage with them, right? Like math is endlessly fascinating, but how do we pose that to kids in a way that is not just, drudgery? And I'm saying that as an English teacher because I had to go for math tutoring every day for 5 years. I have a little bit of damage, but yeah, how do we make it authentic and thus worthwhile? So takeaway 3 is that asynchronous spaces provide room to build soft skills like time management and project planning and interact with content while having dialogue with the teacher. So we have relationships, we have feedback, we have investment. The kids are all working on individual projects and consulting each other and consulting you. They're bringing their own specific prior knowledge to the fore as opposed to an expected set of knowledge. It could be really good. Okay. I'm glad you brought up the rubrics and the grading because now we're going to do something that hopefully we'll be able to do in 20 minutes. So this is something that I call collaborative rubrics. And what you do is you develop a rubric for a project with the kids. Because I know some of us have spent like 22 years developing the perfect persuasive essay rubric. And it has, 47 bullet points for each thing. And the kids, that's not accessible to them. And so what we're doing is we're excluding them from the learning when we do that, right? We say, this is the gate and you have to go through my entrance. So we're going to develop our own rubric for that meme assignment. So we're going to start with talking about what standards should we assess. Oh, I don't know what that was about. Okay. So I have here 7 standards that we could assess in this meme assignment. And what we're going to do is we're going to vote on which 3 we should focus on, right? Because one of the essential parts is that we don't need to do everything with every assignment. We can just do a few things. And I'm going to put this link in the chat. And then we can all do a quick vote. There you go. Yeah, literature is like a companion text, but not an authentic, like, why would you do this in science? Like, what kind of texts would you need in science? But I am all for using literature in science. You know that. We've talked about it. Okay, so everyone pick your 3 favorites. And that's what we use for our little rubric project. And I'm gonna oh my gosh. Okay, let's see what's winning. Oh, we have a 3-way tie for second place. All right, I'm going to go ahead and call it with standard or benchmark 1, the literacy standard for citing specific, oh no, whatever that one is, determining the central idea and integrating visual information. All right. So our next step is to come to the Jamboard. There it is. And we said 1D. We said, oops, central idea. We said integrate visual information. Okay. So if you're doing this with children, especially middle schoolers, but I think I would replace these standards with like student-friendly objectives. So I can statements or students will be able to or whatever. Because those are more accessible. But let's start by talking about what would proficiency look like for these standards. So everyone can get your little postie. And let's talk about just this first standard for now. What would proficiency in researching historical events and people from a variety of perspectives look like in the meme project? And I'll warn you, this is a kind of high level activity for right after lunch. So everybody punch it into high gear. I will start and I'll say that people from many different demographics are included. Cool. See how hard this is? If this is hard for us, how hard must it be for our students to decipher what we want from them? Cool. Okay, so these two things are kind of vague, like culturally responsive teaching, sure, but we're trying to go for what does proficiency look like in this standard from a student's perspective. So in their work, what are they going to need to include, right? They're going to need to cite multiple sources of information. How many sources of information do you think would be enough citations for maybe a 3-meme project? Let's say, I'm just going to make this number up, 6. So proficiency would maybe be 4, we'll just say. Accurate details. Yes. Student choice. They're choosing the historical figures and events that they want to do their memes from. Instead of many, I'm going to say 3. So this is a chance for students to not only share like what their perception of the information is with you, but also to get that specific feedback about what the exact about what the product can look like. And it doesn't have to be like you have to have this, and this. Like reasonably, what does proficiency look like? And then like what would advanced look like, right? So if proficiency is 4, then an advanced level of mastery might be 5 or more sources, right? So then students can shoot for the grade they want, not just to get done, right? And no one gets off the hook with, well, I thought I did. I cited 3 sources, right? But according to our developing rubric, let's say 3 sources would be approaching proficiency, and 1 to 2 sources could be limited proficiency, or 0 to 2, let's say. So we're going from that broad picture of what is expected of me to that narrow picture of how am I going to be successful? So if this is 3 demographics, this could be approaching could be 2 and limited could be 0 and 1, right? And then someone will ask you, well, what does demographics mean? Right? And then you're answering that question right now instead of in a week when the project is due, discovering that they don't know what that word means when they didn't do the assignment, right? So you're getting like real-time information and clarification. Thank you for adding that. Is that Liz doing that for me? No. Shocker. Okay. So this is already pretty specific. All right. So give me a thumbs up or nod or something if this is making sense to you, just the general structure of building a rubric with children. Okay, cool. And then, of course, what you would do is you would do it for both of the different standards that you chose as a class. And you could spread this over a few days. They could do this piece asynchronously, right? Like, then they wouldn't be faced with that pressure cooker situation of like, oh my God, I have to put something in right now. You know, they can think about it, they can come back to it, they can see what other people put and see how it's filling out now that we have some momentum. What if we didn't have to spend the class time to do this? What if this was done asynchronously? Cool. All right. So now we're going to go to the next jam.
So are you suggesting that we have the students put together the rubrics
Yep.
asynchronously?
Yep. And it is, I know, since I also struggle with being the center of attention, because I want to be the center of attention, just I want to clarify that that's what I mean. This puts the focus like on the students. It makes the learning student centered, and then the objectives are clear from the beginning and the students know how to succeed, right? Like it's not this mystery that I'm just putting out there into the world, and they will shock you with their brilliance when it comes to this after some practice. One time we don't have a ton of time here for reflection, but one time we were doing a crucible unit and I said, how are we going to show mastery on the standard of comprehension or something? They were like, well, maybe we could have a test. And I'm like, do you think we need one? And they were like, well, that might be the best way. I'm like, okay. Like, you just never know what they're going to say. And then they'll ask questions like, well, what if you do this, 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 and this, right? Well, what if you do this? What if you do this? And that is all going like in a positive direction, you know, not in a negative one. And so it opens up those gateways for kids to be successful and for them to collaborate, you know, in that space to be like, oh, well, that idea makes me think that I could try this, right? If I type it, is that advanced or proficient? Well, what does the standard say? You know, oh, what if it's a PowerPoint instead of just a paper, right? So it gets those juices going and they are highly invested in a rubric that they built. And I'm saying that from experience. Okay, so what we do with this next piece here is we are going to make up some reflection questions that are going to help the kids to clarify their work and their thinking. And I'm going to show you how this all comes together in just a minute. So nobody panic. So I did one example here. And this is from the New Mexico 8th grade social studies benchmarks, which is to explain the significance of symbols, icons, songs, traditions, and leaders of New Mexico and the United States. So we're kind of talking about the Constitutional Convention in my head. That exemplify ideals and provide continuity and a sense of unity. Well, how am I going to do that? If I'm a 7th grader and I look at that, what does that even mean, right? So now the students are going to say, if we have decided that proficiency is this, how do we make sure that we are all reaching proficiency? So I make the students explain, what connections did you make while developing your project? well, I saw this and then I was watching this movie and it reminded me of this. And then I thought blah, blah, blah. And so I checked that out. And it's this whole sort of like circle of like them showing what their thinking was. What commonalities are there between people and sources in your memes? And what shared experiences are represented by these connections, right? We've all been those poor townspeople left outside, not being part of the party planning committee, right? That's something we can identify with. If we are those people who are obsessed with Lord of the Rings movies, like some people, me and Molly probably, then that is going to appeal to us. And we are using that as our schema to connect our knowledge about the Constitutional Convention to Lord of the Rings. And that is how the knowledge gets internalized. And that's how it's memorable. And that's how it's valuable, right? For students to connect their own experiences to whatever we're teaching them, that is tremendous. So let's look back at our things here. And let's make up a couple of questions that will make sure we have all been able to be successful on this. And I'll do the first one. And I'm just going to enter a text box, but you can use a Post-it note if you like doing that more. I'm going to say that's too broad. Which 3 demographic groups, can't type today, are represented in your project? Okay, and then the kid says, oh, this one and this one, and then they're like, oh, look, I only have 2. That means I need a third one, right? And while you're thinking of a third one, you might think of a fourth one, and then you may as well go to 5, and then you get an advanced one, right? Okay, so what are some other questions we can ask to make sure that we hit that target in this standard? Sorry, I'm pointing a lot today. I started out with grading, and now I'm all riled up.
And Marissa, I'm going to give you a time check. It's 1:41.
Okay, we have 4 minutes. Let me just sort of skip to the juicy part here. So this is what it looks like at the end. Thanks, Liz. We have our standards right here. We have the questions that we developed for a reflection right here. And then the kids answer the questions right here. And then we give them feedback so that they can resubmit for a higher grade and attain that proficiency, attain that advanced proficiency, right? And so then these 2 columns are the only things that you are doing. The kids have done the rest of this, right? It's really cool. And hopefully in the future, when we're all grading equitably, a kid will look at this and say, oh, a 70, I can do better than that, right? And then they're invested in their own success, right? They don't just turn it in and say, oh, that's my grade, and put it in the trash, right? So this is how all of the pieces come together. And if you want help putting together a rubric like this on Excel, or not Excel, on Sheets or Classroom or whatever, go ahead and reach out. So asynchronous structures provide bridges for students and teachers and students to create an ongoing feedback loop, right? With a low risk and high ceiling, right? If I'm not successful at this the first time, I'm going to come back after my teacher has given me feedback asynchronously, and I'm going to fix it, right? It's low risk. It's okay if I mess up the first time or if I forget things. I can build on what I already have to get to where I want. So here are a couple of resources that I'll just share with you, and I'm going to put them all in a document later, but just some stuff that I stole from a bunch of people. So this is a social media template, and the kids can use this to interact. This is a Twitter one, but there's a Facebook one and an Instagram one and a Snapchat one. I did a little example here as Edward Cullen, my vampire, with my Bernie Sanders meme, my 2 favorite things. This is a Google Slides template for Snapchat games. This guy has a whole bunch of really great ideas. And all of these came from ditchthattextbook.com, which if you haven't been there, you should go. This is whose Netflix queue is this? And so I just added another profile on my Netflix queue and put a bunch of stuff in it from the perspective of a character, which I don't know how obvious it will be to this group, but can anyone guess whose Netflix queue this is? No, no one? Okay, it's Elizabeth Bennet's. It's Elizabeth Bennet's Netflix queue, people. And then this is whose phone is this? And this is Joe March's phone, because we have our texts, right? We have our Pinterest board, the things that Joe would pin, and then the other apps on the phone. Like Joe would be learning German because that's who her professor is, and Joe would have a dictation app because she writes all the time, and she would want to get her thoughts out as quickly as possible. So here's a review of all the takeaways. I'm not going to read them out loud to you again, but there they are, and I'll put them in the document. And then if you want to dive into this again or come with your teacher friends, it's happening again on March 10th from 3:15 to 4:15, basically. You can always reach out and email me or send me a shout out on Twitter. And please, please, please do the Power School survey. That's how we get all of our feedback and make decisions for the next ones. And as I'm sure you've heard today, we have Bright Morning coming next month to do 4 workshops. We're paying them and they are experts. So you can have that. So that's really cool too.
Marissa, your slide deck will be available on the hub?
Yes.
Okay, because there were a couple of people who asked.
Yes, of course it will. And there will be a resource thing also. So look for that.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. I can stay around for a minute. I don't know about anyone else. I hope this was helpful. I hope that you've got some ideas to work with now. And again, I would love to work with you. Thank you. Thanks for posting that, Andrea. Anytime.